Just to introduce myself, my name is Donna Smith, and I'm part of the Social Justice Resource Center over at Center of Life. And we are honored today to have Dr. Esohe Osai coming in and having a conversation with Reverend Timothy L. Smith on critical race theory, a subject that has been in the news, and there's been a lot of misunderstandings on it. And we're hoping today that this conversation will clear up some things, that you'll leave here and have a better understanding of just what this theory is. I'm just going to read a little bit of Dr. Osai's biographical statement now, and then I'll put the rest of it in the chat so you can read it all. But Dr. Esohe R. Osai is an assistant professor of practice and applied developmental psychology in the School of Education at the University of Pittsburgh. And Dr. Osai operates as a community engaged scholar with an interest in how communities and schools can support social justice, development, and well-being for children, youth, and families. We are so honored to have her here with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, who's going to explain how this webinar is going to go and how you can ask some questions to our two panelists.
Hi, everyone. So I just want to remind everyone that we are talking about a topic that could be a little bit
You're on mute, Danielle.
Oh. Can you hear me now? Hold on one sec.
We can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So I just want to remind everyone that the topic we're talking about can be a little bit sensitive. So please be respectful when you're asking questions. To ask questions, we're asking you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And that's pretty much it. Just enjoy the talk and just remember to be respectful.
And so we'll just turn it over to Tim to lead us in this conversation. Thank you so much, Tim.
All right, thank you, Donna. I hope everybody can hear me, and I want to say welcome to Dr. Osai. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be able to have you here with us today to have this discussion. So much about your background is so intriguing, but it is always, for me, it is always just such a beautiful thing to see young people like yourself with such knowledge, with such education, and with such life experience that you can share with us and engage us in this conversation. And I'm hoping that we will be able to educate some folks today. I think this is really what it's all about, really getting information out there that will help to educate people so that when they are engaged, so that when they have to talk to somebody, they can speak with some level of knowledge and truth behind it.
Certainly. Thank you so much. I just want to say really quickly that I'm honored to be here with you, Reverend Smith. As I've told you before, I hang out a lot in Homewood and Westinghouse, and you are a legend in that space. And so it's wonderful to be here with the legend, this the community that I live in and get to serve in. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. Thank you. All right, so we've asked you here today to talk about a scholastic theory that has been in the news lately, critical race theory. In local news, stories and theories have been cited as the cause for several controversial decisions by local schools, including changing of curriculum and even more alarming, people losing their jobs, being fired, you know? What is, I think the first step to this conversation is really finding out what is critical race theory.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's the big question, and there are all kinds of stories about what it is and what it isn't out there. But I think first we have to understand what is a theory, right? So a theory, if we're thinking about that word, it's really a system of ideas intended to explain something, right? And I think in our society, we have some explaining to do around what we see socially and to help us understand how we have different groups who have different outcomes and have an understanding of what types of frameworks we put on what we see to make sense of it. How can we make sense of what we're seeing in our nation, our society? And so the core idea of CRT is that race is a social construct. It's not a real thing, it's a social construct. And that racism is not just a product of individual bias or prejudice, but also something that's embedded in legal systems and policies, right? So in other words, it's a way of looking at law's role in facilitating racial inequality in our country. We know that there are things that have been set up historically that have led to what we're seeing currently. And we have an opportunity to apply this theory to understand and explain what we're seeing. And so I think for, it's a legal theory, first of all, it's coming from folks who were in law. So we're 40 years old, and it really comes out of Kimberly Crenshaw and even Derek Bell, who's from Pittsburgh. I think it's a really cool kind of connection for Pittsburgh and this theory. So Derek Bell is from the Hill District, right? And was one of the people who kind of developed this theory. And so I think that for most of us who have this kind of systems level view of the world, it makes sense to us that the explanations what we see might have something to do with the systems that are built that have been historically influencing people in this nation. So, yeah.
That's a great, straightforward definition of what this theory is all about. And I guess the next question would be, why are we hearing so much about it? And, I could think of a million reasons why, but I think we need to talk to you about that. But why are we hearing so much about it now?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And I think folks have different answers to that question. I think I tend to blame the politics of fear as something that's rampant right now in our nation. This idea that we have to come up with things to other ideas and people, and to kind of rally around it with fear, because fear is a powerful emotion, right? That invokes action. People are afraid of something. They're going to move in different ways to protect themselves and their children from what they're afraid of. And so I think in order for some folks to legitimate their beliefs, they need this kind of scary other point of view that they may or may not misconstrue to maybe, have that sense of fear come into play. And so ideas are part of the human experience. And I think our democracy requires dialogue about ideas, and that's really important. But that's not what's happening right now. Right now, it's really this kind of messaging that is the politics of fear and action. And I think, on one hand, we can look at the aftermath of our previous presidency, right? And this kind of use of ideologies that really, I think, dominated the Trump administration to kind of become drivers of our present day discourse politically. That really presents this othering and this sense of fear and, demonizing others. But on the other hand, it's nothing new. It didn't start in 2016. It started decades ago, right? We have this history in America of using beliefs and, to demonize and to polarize, right? To kind of have these political others, these witch hunts, right? That silence certain voices. And it's something that's common. And I think that because of the way that we're kind of dealing with polarization right now politically, we're seeing this fight come to an extreme forefront. And we're seeing it in legislation. So I think I was looking recently, as of September 2nd, 27 states have introduced legislation that is banning discussion of race in schools, racism in schools, or CRT in schools. And so I think about 14 states have passed legislation in that area. And so that's a huge movement, right? That's really impacting at the state level. But I think you have to realize that no one is teaching CRT to our children. That's an important point to make. No one is in the 5th grade classroom learning critical race theory. You might see it in grad school if you're in a certain area of study, but no one's teaching CRT to 5th graders. And I think that we kind of lumped together, unfortunately, talking about race and racism with CRT, which then becomes this way of kind of changing history. But I want to say that, prior to CRT, the Black church was talking about race and racism and social justice for generations, right? There were people talking about this issue prior to this theory coming into play. And what we're doing now, or seeing now, is lumping together of discussion around race and racism with this idea, with the theory of CRT, and putting it all as one big thing and saying, this is all bad. It's all going to destroy our democracy. And I think that's a really unfortunate misinterpretation of the theory, but also a misreading of the experiences of people of color in this nation.
Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking when you were talking is one of the ancient writings have said to us that we should know the truth.
Yes.
Truth would make us free. And the other way of saying it is the truth will set us free.
Yes.
And I think that there's the difference between the making and the setting. And you can be set in prison and be free in your mind if you know the truth.
Yes.
The thing about truth is liberating. Truth also demands change if you're living a lie. And so, I think part of the fear comes when you realize that you've been living a lie, that you've been lied to, and now you're faced with these truths that are calling for us to change the way we live, change the way we act and react, change the way we build relationships, change culture. So the whole cultural shift coming out of this subject is just, to me, is just fascinating to see how much just this one, just the term itself, critical race theory, brings trembling and fear for some.
It brings emotion. It does. It really has that effect. And you really, you hit the nail on the head there with this idea about truth and setting versus making free. And this idea that it's hard to reconcile truth sometimes if the truth is something that you're not comfortable with, right? But your comfort doesn't determine what happened in history, right? And so there's a sense that there's a history of Black people in this nation that's not often given its proper kind of centering in history in terms of how much the Black experience in this country has shaped this country, right? In various ways. And so when we try we can't teach the Civil War and not talk about race and racism. We can't teach the civil rights movements and not talk about race and race. Like those topics, our historical moments have been tied to race and racism very thoroughly. And so I think it's important to kind of point out that if we're trying to say that race can't be talked about in schools and racism can't be talked about in schools, and we're just ignoring a huge portion of American history, right? And even then, we can't read, Zora Neale Hurston or Toni Morrison or Richard Wright and not discuss race or racism, because these are the stories of people. These are lived experiences that are coming out in these books. And so I think it's really beginning to dehumanize a people group by saying that their stories, their experiences, their realities don't exist. It's this invisibleness, right, that we've dealt with for a long time in this nation. And so whether or not you have that same experience or agree with all the perspectives, there's an opportunity to dialogue and to engage in discourse, to be able to take other perspectives and to really hear post-realities that may not be familiar to you, but you can still acknowledge as real and as relevant in this nation. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you really hit on the third question that I was going to ask you already. You're like ahead of the game here. Okay. So when we're talking about this is if we are trying to be more inclusive society, how should we think about ideas and perspectives that have similarities to, critical race theory? And I think you touched on that just now, because so much of what we're stirring up in this conversation, whether it be about the Civil War or whether it be about Middle Passage, or whether it be about so many other things, stir up this particular theory, right in front of us. And it's hard, you can't ignore it.
Yeah. And I think to be more inclusive is really about being open to listening and being open to learning, and to really be open to the reality that your experience isn't universal. Neither is it the center. It's really this opportunity to engage in dialogue. And I really feel like part of our calling in this work of social justice is to advocate for those who are oppressed. And so, and I think that's a biblical calling. I think that's a calling that goes beyond any academic theory, right? This is the idea that we look out for those who are oppressed in any way. Right. And so with that being our calling as a people, in a sense, we should be able to be open to listening and learning, and to grappling with the things that are uncomfortable, and to really being able to decenter our personal feelings and our personal kind of thoughts, to really be critical. This idea of critical is important, right? To be critical is to really give careful judgment and evaluation of something, right? So there's a status quo that we see. We can just say, oh, that's just what it is. This is how it is. This is what I see on the surface. But if we're really being critical, we're really examining thoroughly and giving a judicious evaluation of a situation. And I think people are shying away from wanting to look beyond the surface and be critical, to really kind of pick apart what we're seeing and to make sense of it in a way that may or may not have a pretty picture of what the reality is.
Exactly. You know, we have wrapped ourselves almost like a cocoon. We've wrapped ourselves in misinformation,
Yeah.
and basically, you know, when a caterpillar is about to make that change, and they're wrapped up, it's not clear exactly how that caterpillar is going to come out. And I think that's a part of the fear as well. We're not sure how we're going to come out of this cocoon.
Yeah.
We don't know. We really don't know. You know, what we do know is that we're going to come out with truth.
Yeah.
And that truth is going to make a difference in the way we live in our society, not just America, all over the world, because the world is watching us as we address these critical issues.
Yeah.
The world
is
watching.
Certainly. Yeah. And there are oppressed groups across the world, right? Every nation has its group has been subjugated, right? Whether you're in Indonesia and you're of Chinese ancestry, or you're in, Brazil, and there's different ways that different people groups based on color or ethnicity have been oppressed forever, right? So I think what we're doing in the US in terms of our current struggles can definitely speak to other contexts as well.
I'm glad you brought that up, because, you know, even the system of oppression is a theory that has worked its way throughout the world.
Yeah.
It is a system that is copied and replayed, country after country, people after people. That continues to happen. And you know, a lot of times when we sit back and wonder, well, how can we be a country that have so much, we can be rich in this and rich in those things, but have poor people? You know, we shouldn't have poor people. We shouldn't have people who are uneducated. You know, we shouldn't have people who don't have connections or resources. But it happens because we have a system that is designed to manifest just those kinds of things.
Yep.
And that's why.
Exactly. It's this inherent kind of human way of subjugating. We want to subjugate others. We want to be able to, be on top. And to be on top means someone has to be below. And so that's what we do, is we kind of create these hierarchies that always have someone at the bottom, where we're trying to claw our way to the top. And I think that's just part of our human nature, and it's unfortunate, but I think it's also rectifiable.
You know, another piece too, before I get to the next question, another piece that I like to bring out is that, a lot of times when you see development happening in communities, how developers attempt in their ways to communicate with communities that have been underserved for generations. And the promises always come out to be pretty much the trickle down theory. And it never really trickles down. And it's the same system when we see our politicians running for office. They want to speak to what they call the middle class, but speaking to the poor, speaking directly to the poor, and really helping people to get a grasp of what it's like to grow up in that part of the situation. Nobody wants to talk about that.
Right.
And so that's one of those things that, again, is a part of the theory, of keeping things the same.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, the status quo that can be comfortable, but it's always causing someone experience pain.
Absolutely. Are K through 12 schools using it as a teaching method? Any K through 12 schools using this as a teaching method?
I don't think that CRT is a teaching method that fits well into K through 12 system. I'm a former high school teacher. I taught high school in Detroit, and I've been in schools and out of schools for my entire life, essentially, just working in different community spaces. And it's this reality that the ideas and the concepts related to race and racism are part of history, right? And so when I was teaching history as a Black woman, that was something that came up in ways that helped my students make sense of things. Now, was I teaching critical race theory? No. To be honest, I hadn't even heard about it yet at that point in my life, right? I was a high school teacher, hadn't had that exposure to the theory, but at the same time, I had an experience, and I had stories, and I had read and understood history in such a way that I had to bring it to bear in my classroom. And so I think there are people who, like myself and others, who understand history, who see what's happening, and we know that. And what is history but a story, right? What is history but a story? And we all have our stories, right? And so, and people have experiences and grievances that we know are critical and are important to be told for us to understand not just our history, but our current day situation. And so with all that say CRT is not a teaching method, but I think there are folks who are agitating for justice, and these folks are teachers, and they're leaders in education, and they're in policy, and they're writers and thinkers and activists even. And so to the extent that ideas about race and racism are a part of our reality and our history, then that's going to come up in any educational setting. It reflects a real history, but we also know that the history has implications for now as well, but it's not necessarily teaching the theory, but it's about understanding the experiences of people. And like I said before, I think, Black folks, and I think the Black church in particular has been talking about this for generations, right? And so we can't just go to 1970 something and say this theory came up and now we're all ruining America. No, this is the reality of America since the beginning. And we've been talking about it, but voices have been ignored for so long that it's been silenced. And I think with last year's uprising and all the things that are happening around race in America, the voices are being elevated even more. Yeah. And I think people are afraid of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. The more that there are voices that are speaking out behind incidents that simply prove that the oppression continues, then the more this thing brings fear into people for some reason. And is it harmful? Are there harmful effects to teaching history from a racial lens?
Yeah, this word harm kind of strikes me, right? Because harm is such a consistent and present reality in our world. Harm happens so frequently, I don't necessarily think that ideas themselves are typically harmful. I think it's what people do with ideas that inflict harm sometimes, right? So teaching history is not harmful in and of itself, even if it highlights the presence and pervasiveness of race and racism. But if you are someone who hears it and you're kind of in your feels and you take it personally and you fall into this sense of, shame and condemnation, then that can be self-harm. But it wasn't the history that harmed you. It was your own interpretation of that, right? So there's this kind of framework I use about information and then information and interpretation and application, right? So you have to interpret what you're learning and then apply what does that mean for my life? And so if your interpretation puts you in this place of feeling harmed, then that's really on you. And there's opportunity to actually not let it turn into harm, but actually turn into healing if you're able to leverage that information to advocate for and to be concerned about the needs of those who are marginalized. And so I think that teaching history from racial lens itself is not harmful, but how we interpret what we're hearing can inflict harm on ourselves if we interpret a certain way. At the end of the day, we have to be able to use the information in a way that causes action and application that can actually lead to healing and not harm.
My dad used to say, we have to learn how to eat the meat and spit out the bones.
Come on.
There's some people who have never eaten fish that has bones in it. You got to be careful when you eat Virginia spots, when you eat whiting.
Little pieces of bone and get you caught right there, right?
Yeah, man, perch. You got to handle some of that stuff, and I was thinking about that on other pieces of meat as well, because there's some situations where you may want to spit out the bones, but the bones may have value as well. And see, the thing about it is, even a dog doesn't want a dry bone. A dog wants a bone that has something in it. And this is another reason why I think it is so important for us, even though we know that there is fear, there trepidation around this term, this whole thing. People are just concerned. I think it's so important that we take this almost as a surgeon and begin to just dissect this thing so that people can see it through the lessons, through the precepts and examples that are out there, so that people can really see it clearly, because it's just truth that's coming at us. And it, like you said, the harmful piece. Well, I'm not sure about the harmful piece. It's like drinking something that you don't like, but it's helping you. It's helping you. Maybe the harm is that it doesn't taste so good. Going down, but it might be good for you at the end of the day.
That's so true. And to kind of look at a different angle too, I think the racism is what's harmful, right? You can't ignore something because it's not comfortable. It's harmful. And I heard Kimberly Crenshaw refer to racism as being similar to asbestos, right? When we discovered asbestos was in our structural society, we didn't just ignore it. We can't just say, oh, and pretend it's not there because it's harmful. We had to actually deal with it because we knew that the asbestos can actually harm people and cause damage to people's lives. And so if we just ignored asbestos and said, it's just, it's not there, we don't see it, we would then be allowing ourselves to die in response to this substance is harmful to the human body, right? And so in the same way, it's with racism, right? We can't just ignore it and pretend it's not there. And it's not embedded in the structures, just like asbestos is. It's literally embedded in structures, and we put it there, right? Yeah. And so if we just were to ignore it, then that's going to be a mistaken move because you're not dealing with the issue, because the issue, what it is harmful. And so, is teaching about racism and race harmful? As harmful as racism itself is in our nation.
Change is imminent.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just going to ask this question. I might be a little bit off the page, but why do you think, Dr. Osai, why do you think that it is so hard for people to look at things and it is evident, right? Mm-hmm. It's very evident, mm-hmm. and still resist the thing that is imminent, which is change. We are changing. I mean, there are movements that are out here right now. There are, all kinds of movements and things that are out mm-hmm. here that mm-hmm. are challenging us mm-hmm. to create a cultural shift. Yeah. I can remember when, I have dreadlocks, all right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I know that I know young people that could not walk across the stage mm-hmm. to graduate because they had dreadlocks, mm-hmm. because they had locks, mm-hmm. Or because their hair was a certain way.
Yeah.
And what is that? What is that causes us as human beings to resist, mm-hmm. something that is so natural?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it goes back to our interpretation of reality, right? So we see the racial wealth gap in the US, right? We know that Black people as a whole have significantly less wealth than white people in America. So we can interpret that in different ways, right? So one interpretation is, they just don't, Black people just don't know what's with their money. They just don't save it. They don't have all these individual interpretations, right? But if we look at history, we see that there are actually intentional structures set up to keep people of color from buying homes. So when we came out of the war, there was these federal policies that allow folks to get money to buy homes, the Housing Act, right? And Black folks were excluded from that from the beginning. And so then and we know that wealth comes mainly through real estate in this nation, right? And so I can then interpret and make sense of this wealth gap if my grandfather, who came from the war, could not get that same benefit and buy a home because he was a Black man, right? And so I think, we can interpret our reality in this way, but I think we all have a worldview. We all have a way of seeing the world. We're not always aware of our own worldviews, but our worldviews give us a way to interpret our world, right? And so if my worldview is, trying to protect my own and who I am and kind of have this rosy view of life, then I'm going to resist anything that's going to lead to change because it's going to disrupt my comfortability and it's not going to fit into my interpretation of the world, right? And so I think, our interpretation of reality is what kind of keeps folks from wanting to adapt to change and to adjust to the changes happening in our nation.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned your grandfather. I thought about my grandfather was one of the first African-Americans to own a home in Homewood.
Wow.
And he was able to do that only because they did not see him. His last name was Muskelly. And so Muskelly is a Sicilian name. So Muskelly is from a family name in one of the cities in Sicily.
Okay.
And so they thought he was Italian. Huh. And so he was able, and there were a lot of Italians back then, back in those days, a lot of Italians living around Homewood, Larimore, and area.
I heard that.
And he was able to get a house.
Yeah.
But outside of that, had they seen his face, he would not have slipped through that crack at all.
Exactly. Interesting. That's a story. That's a history that's relevant and needs to be told.
In K through 12 schools, how is curriculum created?
So K through 12 schools, the state legislator and the local school districts have the biggest say in what happens, what's taught in classrooms. So we have very strict laws against the federal government actually influencing local educational policies in terms of what's taught in schools. And so, we have state level policymakers, and we have school districts, school boards who can approve or disapprove certain curriculum materials. And in reality, curriculum is developed by companies that are looking to make profit, right? So what's a company is going to try to make profit in some way, and so they're going to include ideas in their text and in their curriculum material that is going to be sold. People are going to want to buy and purchase and use in their school systems. And so I think, there's this really local level influence around what curriculum is taught and how it's created. So principals and teachers are more directly connected to what happens in classrooms than folks at higher levels of government. But I do know that curriculum is created by people, individual people who have a certain perspective and viewpoint. They're also trying to sell a product in most cases, right? And then they're able to push their curriculum through state level policies or school boards or principals and even teachers to allow the information to get into schools. And so it's kind of moving pieces that are all operating at the same time. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it's more of a local level reality than it is federal in that sense.
I think that it's interesting how the mentality that produces a substandard curriculum to African Americans is just replenished all over the country. I know the Social Justice Resource Center focuses on 4 issues, substandard education, bad policing, the courts, and the prison system, which you can learn a lot about critical race theory just from studying those 4 systems, which capitalism runs through all 4 of those systems.
Yes, indeed. It does.
And so, I guess as a parent, I would want to know how can we ensure that historically accurate and inclusive curriculum be taught to our children when they go to school? What can we do?
Yeah, I think for parents, 2 things are really important. Number 1 is to do your research. So what does a historically accurate inclusive curriculum actually look like? So you want to be able to see what's out there, look on the website of the school district to see what curriculum is being used, examine the source, right? So go back to the textbook maker, whoever's making this material, and see what they have in their space. And number 2 is to show up, show up at school board meetings, at parent nights at school, these activities that happen at school. If you are present and make your voice heard, you're going to have say around what happens. That's what happened, quite frankly, in Sewickley, right? Sewickley Academy, where a parent group pushed back against what they saw as divisive curriculum around critical race theory in their perspective. And they used that to leverage their collective power to shift an entire school in that situation. And so I think, parents need to, first of all, to research, understand understand the truth and what's happening, what's out there. And secondly, show up and to talk to folks. And I think, I, as a former teacher, I think it's valuable to talk to teachers. Your best connection to your students' learning is through their teacher. And so to be able to have that connection with the teacher is really powerful. And then from there, agitate and as you need to ensure that what's being taught is something that's affirming your students' identity and their reality.
Exactly. No, I think that's so important. We try to encourage our parents to get involved, to understand, to really understand what the work that their kids are bringing home.
Yeah.
And to make sure that they have, even if they can't necessarily do the work, because, the work that my children brought home, even as somebody who went to college and did master's work, I still, I struggle with my daughter's fifth grade homework, because it was her division was different from my division.
They change it, don't they? They change the processes, right?
But I do think that it's really important, in addition to some of the things that you said relative to that, in that, like you said, when you talk about showing up and then building relationships, because the schools need to hear our story, just as much as they need to learn it. They need to hear it from people who are actually experiencing it. I feel like, and I think the Social Justice Resource Center would say that the people who are experiencing oppression right now and all kinds of discrimination are the experts that we need to listen to, because they are the ones that are navigating systems, that are designed to keep them in the place that they're in and designed to create that from a generational standpoint.
Exactly.
And I just think what you said has so much meaning to it.
Yeah.
wanted to go into a couple other pieces here. We were talking about the myths that are around, around critical race theory. And just wanted to kind of get into some of that. Critical race theory is a new, it's a new theory that presents the United States of America as though it isn't a great country. That's one of the myths, that is something new, and it's saying America is bad or whatever the case might be. Well, speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have very simplistic views of what's good and bad, right? So most things aren't all good or all bad, right? So we can examine and understand some of the negative aspects of our history in our attempt to create a more perfect union, right? So even when we wrote kind of the founding documents around this nation, we knew that there's this perfecting process. This over time, things change and become better, create a more perfect union, right? And so it wasn't perfect from the beginning. You can't say it was perfect from the beginning when you had chattel slavery. You can't say it, like it doesn't even make sense. That's the most dehumanizing practice we could ever imagine, was at the foundation. And so, no, it wasn't perfect. Now, does that mean that, it's a horrible nation? No, by no means. By no means. There are things about this nation, obviously, that are beneficial to people. And there's ways that we have things established here that make this a place where people want to come and live. But at the same time, if we can't be critical and examine deeper and really try to come to an understanding of some of the things that aren't so great for all people, then we're doing ourselves an injustice by not being thoughtful.
Yeah. I think when we talk about the, sort of the founding days of this country, it seems like there was such a desire to, really create something where there was freedom, not for all, but where there was freedom, and that freedom would be protected. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why we're able to have this conversation today on Zoom, which is absolutely not protected,
Right.
And so, I think we can't, like you said, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not all bad, but we have to continue the conversation because it's a critical conversation. Dr. Osai, can we talk a little bit about your programming? Because I think the work that you're doing in Westinghouse is just phenomenal. And I think that it is food for the students that are in that school, that they are able to take on a different way of looking at things, but also it equips them. Before we go into it, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the fact that how education is really a right.
Yes.
And so education is a right, but to me, that is too general of a statement. I think everyone should be educated I think there should be a culturally responsive way of educating people so that they know who they are, so that who they are is lifted up. And that they find their place and their contributions in our world, as opposed to feeling marginalized and literally having to find somebody that they can look up to, that looks like them, somebody that goes to the moon that looks like them, somebody that in science that looks like them, I think that's so important,
I agree. Yeah. One thing that I'm really, really passionate about is educational equity, and how inequity actually adversely affects not just, children's own view of themselves, but even affects their ability to go from being children to being adults, right? This idea of the post-secondary transition is thoroughly impacted when our education system does not serve Black youth from marginalized communities, right? So we have to examine not just the effects of children and their viewpoints of life and their understanding of who they are in the moment, but how can they successfully develop into adulthood without an education that affirms who they are and gives them the tools for the next level, whether that's college or career. And so that's really my passion. And so the Justice Scholars Institute, which we founded back in 2016 at Westinghouse, is really a social justice informed effort that provides credit-bearing college prep experience for students at Westinghouse in Homewood. And so basically, since we started, over 300 University of Pittsburgh credits have been earned by students at Westinghouse Academy. And we've been able to not just engage the students around these topics of social justice and helping them see, and helping them, giving them a space to talk about and discuss their interpretation of the world from this lens that they have, but also giving them a chance to learn what it means to have a rigorous educational experience that will prepare you to go to college. And I think that's so important because the students who we work with are brilliant. They're not always given the ideal educational experiences they need, but they have what it takes to really go and become change agents in our world, right? And so I don't expect the systems to change. I don't expect, America to all of a sudden just stop being racist, right? But I do expect these young folks who we're working with and giving them opportunity to pursue their education, they can be the ones who do cause a change to happen. They can be the ones who may go into education or go into the sciences or go into healthcare and be in spaces where they have a voice to advocate for those who are marginalized. And so it's been a real blessing to be involved in this program. Our alumni are currently at a number of universities, including Penn State, Duquesne, Morehouse College. We have students who have gone on, and actually one student who, our first cohort of students in our program finished college this year. And so we have one who's back teaching now, first year as a teacher here in Pittsburgh after going through our program and finishing college at LaSalle University in Philadelphia. And so it's been great to partner with Westinghouse. We've been fortunate to expand this year also to serve Perry as well as Mallions as well, to really kind of be in the spaces where we know the students are hungry for more opportunities, and we're able to bring them into this partnership, which allows them to get exposure to college, earn college credits, and also have these kind of workshops and dialogues around topics that are important to them as they grow and develop.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the conversations that you have with students around this, around the program, and around maybe even some of the subject matter that we're talking about today?
Yeah, certainly. So we have an out of school time aspect of our program where we work with some of our justice fellows to discuss issues of justice in our nation. And so one thing that we do is talk about the reality of educational inequity, right? So we bring in, we try to bring in a lot of like graphics, right? Like kind of data in a sense to help students get used to seeing and interpreting bar charts and graphs, right? And so we bring in, this bar chart that shows earnings potential for those who did not earn a high school diploma versus those who have a high school diploma versus those with an associate's degree versus those with a bachelor's degree, so on and so forth, right? And we see the difference in education leads to higher income potential, right? Higher earnings potential, and then earnings over a lifetime. And so we're linking this idea of inequitable education to earnings, right? And so the students didn't mean asked to ask questions about, like, they feel like they don't have any exposure to learn about financial literacy. They haven't had classes where they're learning about credit or how, home ownership. They haven't had those experiences. And so we were able to then partner with the local organization to actually provide financial literacy classes for the students to be able to not just learn about what's out there in terms of the inequities that exist, but to then equip themselves to equip their communities to have different opportunities, right? And so the students, they want to learn, they want to know, they want to experience, they want to grow and have opportunities. And they also want to be taken seriously. Sometimes we diminish the value of our young people and their voices and what they're experiencing. But I think our goal is really to give them the voice and the platform to talk about these issues, understand them, and also to do something about it.
You are literally, Dr. Osai, you are literally changing the future.
Thank you.
By doing what you're doing. I mean, I can just see it, just as you are delivering to them this education, and it's a practicum. It's not just a sitting and learning and being talked to or being lectured to, but you're giving them a practical way of working this out so they can literally live out their academics and really demonstrate it in the rest of their lives, whether they go to a four-year college or a VOTEC or any of those kinds of things. What you're giving them is so invaluable. And, it's just amazing.
Thank you.
It's just amazing.
It's really my purpose, and I really feel like that's what I want to do, is help kids understand their purpose and pursue that. So that's what we do.
As we get to sort of an ending of our time here, which I hate to end it because I'm just so interested in everything that you're doing. How could we, as as advocates, as leaders, you know, how, and you mentioned the church on several occasions, and obviously I have some experience in the church, but how could the church be even more active and proactive, so to speak, in this work that we're talking about? Because like you said, there's so much education that we received through the church, you know. Yeah. And I have a person who works for us. His name is Maurice. And Maurice always says, we need to have prevention before bad intentions, you know. And I thought, boy, you know, where have we missed the mark with respect to getting, I mean, we've been preaching the gospel and we've been preaching all the, you know, the other stuff around religion and whatnot, but where have we missed the mark with respect to things like this? How are we not engaged in this conversation on a more national level?
Yeah, I think we have to be practical. I think we have to not let our ways of doing things in the past keep us from seeing what's needed now, right? Because young people need opportunities. They need to be connected in spaces with adults who care for them and care about them. And if you know, I believe preaching the gospel, that's really important. But can I also meet some basic needs? And can I also have strategies in place to really connect with people and provide them opportunities to relationship to grow and to develop in different ways, right? So we know that there's so many pulls on young people's attention and their time and their energy. We know that, especially with, you know, social media and different media outlets, there's so many things that can pull them into various directions based on the appetites that we have as humans, right? But I think to the extent that young people can be grounded through connection to people who care, who can actually provide them with opportunities, that's when we really will see, you know, real sustainable change, because there's so much that we're battling in our world, from racism and injustice and inequity to just the reality of distractions, right? So many young people are just wandering aimlessly and dealing with mental health challenges on extreme level. I'm seeing that so much more now than ever before. There's so many challenges people have just internally in terms of their own mental health. And so when we have an answer to the problems and the questions that we can see in young people's lives, we have an opportunity to connect with them and help them see a way out and help them find their path into, you know, what their purpose is.
If I'm a person from, you know, rural, you know, Pennsylvania or just suburban somewhere, and I want to know more about, I want to take on more knowledge, but knowledge that leads to action. What books or other educational instruments would you suggest that I take on?
Yeah, there's so many out there. And some are, you know, newer, and there's also some that are just historically strong. I think I think The Pedagogy of the Oppressed is just the book that a lot of folks go to have a better understanding of the experience of oppressed groups. And that's one that I think is useful in terms of reading that one. I also think a lot of books just around, I'm a psychologist by training in some ways, right? So the power of habits, I think, is really important. And so if I'm trying to think about what I need to do in my own kind of experiences, I want to be able to understand how I operate as a human being and what some of my kind of, I'm always looking at both the societal and the individual at the same time, right? So we can see and understand the reality of the challenges societally. We can also think about what I can do in terms of my own role and how I can create the types of experiences for myself and for others in my sphere that will lead to healthy outcomes, right? And so I think there's really a lot of good books that help people think about what they can do in terms of goal setting, in terms of having the ability to connect in community, in terms of having the ability to be able to pursue, you know, your calling and your passion in ways that are really, really critical.
You know, one of the things that, thank you for that, you know, one of the things that I really like about the Social Justice Resource Center is that they are trying to create a space and an environment that is sort of what you might call a judgment-free zone.
Yeah.
So that if you come into that zone, you're free to talk about how you grew up and what you learned, and nobody's going to spit that back in your face. Nobody's going to hold that against you. And, because whatever we learned growing up in our developmental years is probably the things that we practice when we get older. Exactly. And so it's kind of baked into us. So, the Social Justice Resource Center has made it so that people can have conversations with each other and build relationships with each other so that they literally are performing the act of giving each other grace. If I make a mistake and every mistake that I make is a scar, a distinguishable scar. Like if I lie this morning and that lying scar is on my cheek, and then I meet up with you and you lied and you have the lying scar on your other cheek, I can't look at you and judge you. I have to give you grace. That's true. Because we have the same scar.
Yeah, that's real. That's good. That's a good analogy. I like that. Yeah. To be real, that's what it is. I think it comes down to the importance is being real where we are and not putting on pretense for the sake of observing.
And I bring that up because I think there's so many times when we're trying to have meaningful conversation around some of these very difficult things, and sometimes people can't resist the temptation of kind of throwing condemnation on folks who grew up differently than they did, And I think we're not going to get anywhere if we can't listen to each other, if we can't really take in the story of the person that is sitting in front of us, and really relate.
Yeah, and back to books. I know you asked about that. There's a lot of books, the historical books that are really powerful. Isabel Wilkerson, I think, is an author who writes beautifully and really kind of brings you into the world. So The Warmth of Other Suns, Cass, she has the ability to write about history and present realities in ways that it moves you, right? So I think those are some really interesting texts to read. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome is a really interesting read as well. Dick Root, I think, is the author of that one. There are lots of texts you can read that kind of bring you into someone else's experience, but then also you want to take that knowledge and use that to actually help you be better, help you have better ways of being and doing in the world, and to then become an advocate for those who are oppressed.
That's right. And I think reading these books, you all, is not a silver bullet. Right. What it is it's a journey. It's a journey that we're all taking together. We're all experiencing it in different kinds of ways. So I think that the books that Dr. Osai has named are really, really appropriate books for us to be able to read. But I would also say, in addition to that we make sure that we find the practical application that is in each one of these books, which I think are phenomenal books. Let's try to find the practical application, and then don't excuse ourselves from actually practicing, what we need to practice. Exactly. Don't let yourself off the hook in terms of building relationships, listening, really work on the listening skills, skills of empathy, all of those kinds of things, because if we don't do that, then we just end up back in the same place. We read a good book and we sat it aside and we can mark that off. Oh yeah, I read that. Not enough.
What's the application of your learning? That's the question.
Absolutely. I believe that there are some questions in the chat. I'm going to check in with Danielle, who's checking in on the questions.
It looks like right now there are no questions. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Only the hosts and the panelists can see the chat, so your question would be anonymous. And then you can also ask in the Q&A box as well. Yes. And just some information that Donna had dropped into the chat earlier. If you want more information about our programming, you can send an email to socialjusticepgh.412@gmail.com. And that is a good way to sign up for our monthly newsletter. The September monthly newsletter has not gone out yet. So if you were to register for that tonight by emailing us, then you would get our September newsletter. And also our webinar will be available on our website, and the link for the website is in the chat as well. Feel free to share our website with whoever you want. We really want people to go and visit it. And I guess we'll give it a couple more minutes to see if anybody has any questions.
Yes, please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. I know that sometimes with subject matters like this, it may seem a bit heavy from time to time because, you know, it's something that you may be hearing. You're hearing a lot of myths around critical race theory. But I think that Dr. Osai has actually made it very, very simple for us to really swallow. And then also given us some really practical ways that we can, that it can come a lot clearer to us so that we can be a lot more illuminated to what this thing is all about. We're living it. I mean, we're just living it, you know? And so I think that it's really important that if you have any questions, whether it be during this webinar or afterwards, please send in your questions. We'll be happy to address each one of them, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
I would love, Dr. Osai, I would love to come and just spend time seeing your program at Westinghouse High School.
That would be a joy.
You know, Westinghouse has produced some amazing people, and you know, I don't mean to say it because I went there.
I'll say it. You won't say you're too humble, but I'll say it. I'll say it.
But when I think about my experience at Westinghouse, you know, I think about how I remember every single teacher who actually taught me. And I remember every single teacher who just let me skate. So I remember both sets of those teachers. I could name them all right now, but I won't. But I can tell you, for the teachers who actually taught me, I remember Mr. Crawford. Mr. Crawford was the only teacher, in addition to Miss Spencer, who taught African-American education. So they taught us about Black people. They taught us about Afros. They taught us about African. They taught us about, they made all of the connections to us. And it was 2 classes. That was it. It was just 2 classes that I had back in those days. One was an English class, and that was Miss Spencer and Mr. Crawford. Mr. Crawford was history. And so, you know, I will never forget the people who shared that kind of education, because I spent most of my life as a baby boomer. I spent most of my life trying to educate myself and trying to find and unearth these truths that I knew were there. So until I was able to read certain books and get with certain people who would mentor me, I had something deep down inside of me that was working inside of me that was saying, you know what, you got to search. You have to search for truth. So I found myself educating myself in my own way, you know, so that my education looked quite eclectic. But even with that, it was me searching for me and searching for my ancestors, you know, and all of that.
Yeah, you did the work yourself, which is, you know, the school should be helping you with that in a really intentional way. And that's what we're trying to definitely bring.
So we do have a question. The question is, how can the mental health care system better meet the needs of African Americans?
That's a question. That's a question. I do believe it takes, first of all, the willingness to acknowledge when we're not well, right? And the willingness to be able to confront and address when we see evidence of people not being well, right? And then, you know, the healthcare system has its strengths and has its limits. It has its inabilities in some ways to really be as connected to communities as maybe it could be. So I think we as community members have to be willing to bring people to awareness of things that are happening that may indicate mental health challenges, and then also be willing to find what we need to address those challenges, whether it's through counseling or therapy, whether it's through certain classes around mindfulness, like being open, whether it's going, I believe the church has a role. I believe spirituality has a role in addressing it too. So being open to finding avenues to meet the needs we have around mental health, and to not hide or be in shame over challenges that we see in our own lives or those around us.
That was a great question, because I think that, you know, there are, you know, people of color, you know, all over the country who are experiencing PTSD, you know, and navigating through it. And I think the navigating of PTSD as a result of oppression and racism is a very unhealthy process.
Yeah.
You know, because you end up making the navigating part a lifestyle that you almost can't get away from. So you can be on vacation and you're still trying to navigate that thing, you know, and I think it's a very unhealthy process. I really do.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question.
And we did not have another question, but we like that you can answer right now, but we did have a question to see if maybe we could put together a glossary with some of the terms that we talked about tonight, and also a book list to get out to folks who attended.
Okay.
And we do want to thank Dr. Osai. Dr. Osai, I can't tell you how thankful we are that you joined us here this evening, how proud we are that you are doing this work, especially in a Pittsburgh public school. We need help in our public school system. And I think that what you're doing could be a seed that spreads throughout all of the rest of the public schools, hopefully. And at least I'm hoping that will be the case.
Yeah.
We just want to thank you for sharing with us and for sharing the resources and sharing your thoughtful, very, 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 very thoughtful answers with us. I think your answers just gave us so much to think about and also have encouraged us to go and do some personal research as well. And so please give us your some closing words.
Yeah, thank you. This is my honor, really, and a blessing to be able to talk today with this group and to share some thoughts that I have. I guess in closing, I just want to again acknowledge the importance of not ignoring things that we see that are challenging, right? So there are things that are not pretty, like asbestos, right? That's built into structures, right? That we can easily ignore because we don't necessarily want to confront it. But when we do understand how harmful it is, we have to do something about it. And I think that's what this moment calls for in our nation. And it's really for the children. I think we're really good at wanting to protect children, right? The vulnerable population. And I think the more we can understand that the education system, if it teaches history accurately, is actually protecting children more than it's harming children. White children aren't being harmed, they learn about the reality of racism in our nation. They're not being harmed. They're able to then take action to really address challenges and hopefully pursue a more perfect union, right? That's our goal. And so I'm happy to be a part of the conversation and to continue to do so. And I'll just share also quickly a report around the work we're doing in Justice Scholars, so folks can check that out and be able to see a bit about it. And hopefully as we continue to grow and develop, we'll be able to connect more around some of the things we're doing with youth in the city of Pittsburgh.
Outstanding. Thank you all for being with us. I'm going to turn this back over to Donna Smith for some closing words, and then we're going to be completed.
I needed to unmute, but thank you, Dr. Osai. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful, wonderful conversation that you guys had. I learned a lot, and I just am so grateful for the work that you're doing in Pittsburgh, and especially with our young people. It's amazing the credits that they can get when they're in high school. That's something that I hope that so many of them are able to take advantage of. And you are such a role model for those kids. And I just thank you for all the work that you do. And thank you, Reverend Tim Smith. I appreciate you for leading this conversation. This has just been a wonderful evening. And I thank everyone for tuning into this. At the Social Justice Resource Center, we have so many projects that are in the works. We'll be sending out an email about a viewing of a movie that's coming up at the end of September. This movie talks about the role that the NRA has played in preventing gun control. And it's such a touching movie. I was in tears when I was watching it because it deals with all the mass shootings and the shootings that have happened, involving guns and the damage that it does to families. And but the purpose of the Social Justice Resource Center in showing this movie is to give us action steps of what we can take to prevent these unnecessary deaths from gun violence. So I'm hoping that you guys, we put the email in the chat. Please send us, just drop us a line with your email so we can get the information out to you about how you can tune in for this movie and be a part of this very special project that the Social Justice Resource Center is doing in collaboration with Center of Life. So I said all of that just to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. Osai. Thank you, Reverend Tim Smith, and good night.
Thank you all. Good night. Take care.